Today, on this episode of The Crossover, we will be discussing the future of brain mapping with President of the Brain Mapping Foundation, Chairman for the Society of Brain Mapping, and Director of the National Center for Nanobioelectronics, Dr. Babak Kateb. Learn how understanding brain anatomy and function can be rapidly integrated into translational therapies utilizing nanotechnology, devices, imaging, as well as stem cell therapy. Much more on this episode of The Crossover. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Babak Kateb today. How you doing? Great having you on, buddy.
Friend. Good to see you.
Yeah. How's everything out in the West Coast?
Well, it's pretty nice, but how about you? What's happening there?
Fortunately, it missed us here in Miami. It's really just the West Coast of Florida. So we're good here, and I look forward to chatting. Listen, I'm going to do a brief introduction just while everyone's logging on.
Sure.
We have the pleasure of speaking with my friend and colleague here, Dr. Babak Kateb, who is a world-renowned expert in brain mapping. As background, he is president of the Brain Mapping Foundation, chairman for the Society of Brain Mapping, director of the National Center for Nanobioelectronics, and CEO of Smart Microscopy. As I said, he's a world-renowned neuroscientist who's really had 20 years of experience focused on novel therapeutics for brain cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's. He was director of research and development in the Department of Neurosurgery at the City of Hope Comprehensive Cancer Center, where he established a collaboration with NASA and pioneered a novel technique with brain cancer immunology. Later, he joined the Department of Neurosurgery at Cedars Sinai, where he established a clinical trial, again with NASA technology for brain mapping. His groundbreaking work has been recognized by President Joe Biden, the mayor of Los Angeles, and the governor of California. Babak has also been deeply involved in global neuroscience legislation. He has chaired 9 congressional briefings and was one of the key players in President Barack Obama's Brain Initiative, as well as co-author of the G20 World Brain Mapping Initiative. Of interest, he's also an artist who has galleries for his paintings. Very cool. And he's an 18-time marathon runner. So kudos, brother. That's very impressive. Probably more impressive than the other stuff you've done. So
2 more.
2 more.
Plus
that's a very, very impressive list of accomplishments. I think the 20 marathons might be at the top. But anyway, here to discuss the future of brain mapping, such an interesting topic with such a broad impact on the future of medicine. So really, really excited to have you here today and to discuss that, Babak.
Pleasure, my friend.
So let's just start with.
Thank you very much for having me there in your amazing
podcast. Of course. Oh, absolutely. Listen, thanks for being here. I just want to start with basics for people who may be not medically inclined, but what exactly is brain mapping?
Yeah. So prior to the Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutic establishment, brain mapping was almost always was considered as brain imaging, but we redefined that to like a Google map. You get a snapshot of Earth, that's the MRI. You zoom down on cities, that's your functional MRI. You zoom down on roads and bridges, that's brain connectomics and diffusion tensor imaging. And then you zoom down on the cars, those are cells. People in the cars are basically nanoparticles. So we defined the brain mapping, anything from looking at the imaging all the way to the cellular level. But we also look at the brain mapping not from the mapping standpoint, but like a Google map. When you map something, you actually know where to go, function of different buildings and, facilities. So therefore, there's an element of therapeutics to our mapping definition.
Now let's just, people talk about the brain as the last frontier in medicine. How little do we currently understand about the brain?
Well, in many areas, very little. In many areas is good enough to start basically hacking the brain in the sense of brain-computer interface. A lot of our colleagues have made a lot of developments in brain-computer interface, and we we now can put electrodes in someone's brain, and then that person thinks he wants to move his arm, their robotic arm moves. So these are good for amputees, for ALS patients, and now brain implants are being used for Alzheimer patients. So our understanding of brain is developing further and further, but as we gain more and more data, we are wrapping ourselves with the problem of how do we manage this massive data? How do we collect it? How do we share it? How do we actually use it? And how do we actually put guidelines around it so it's ethically sound? Like, okay, we are doing brain-computer interface, but you have to see what if I put a cap of BCI on my head and one on your head and then read your mind. So is that ethical or not? So the ethics of brain mapping really important for us as an organization.
Never even thought about that. That's super interesting what you're talking about, the ethics. I was reading about all the difficulties of brain mapping, and someone said that the difficulty of brain mapping can be equated to being in space and trying to listen to what people are saying down on Earth. What do you think is the biggest challenge with brain mapping? What's been the biggest difficulty you've encountered?
So from the imaging standpoint, so let me just get you from imaging all the way down to the nanoscale. From the imaging standpoint, resolution has been an issue. As you know, we had 1.5 Tesla, 3 Tesla, now 7 Tesla. And if you compare the images, is day and night. So as we go up on the Tesla, then of course there's a limitation on biologics, the use of it. But it's the imaging is getting better. So on the photonic side of it, using basically particles of light to detect, normalcy and abnormalities, the field is developing. I'm editor of the textbook of neurophotonics and brain mapping. So we actually use light to detect cancer, meaning that cancer cells, even brain cancer cells, they have an optical signature. So they have fluorophores that are connected to cancer cells like NAD, FAD. Those are also in normal cells, but in cancer cells, because they have high level of activities, these fluorophores upregulate. So you have a peak excitations that is basically set by physics. So using optical spectroscopy, you can actually detect while you're operating where the cancers are. So there's a new generation of optical imaging coming up that are non-invasive. You're familiar with 5-ALA in neurosurgery being used for delineating the tumor, but we're using gadolinium nitride arrays to basically identify those fluorophores and basically pick up those cancer cells while operating without injecting anything to the patient. So we had the preoperative mapping that's getting better. Intraoperative mapping is becoming much more optical. We are walking away from the double donut MRIs and the heavy duty machines. We're getting to optical sensors and optical spectroscopy. Now going down to the level of cells and connectomics, obviously diffusion tensor imaging has been very helpful in kind of looking at the pathways of the brain, and then avoid those pathways as you're debulking the tumors or debulking the epileptic regions. But new generation of imaging will also have a nanoparticle attached to it. So we have nano-neurosurgery, we call it, which is defined as treating neurological conditions with precision nanomedicine. So we have a textbook of nano-neurosurgery that you and your group are contributing to it, and the second edition is coming up. We're delighted, and the first one was the textbook of the year of the INS back in 2014. So the nano-neurosurgery component and nanoparticles become more and more important in the world of neurosurgery. As you may know, when the micro neurosurgery came to the field, it was revolutionizing. And of course, Professor Yashar Gill and Professor Sami take a great lead on that. But the nano neurosurgery is very, very new, well, somewhat new field that you will use targeted nanotherapy to destroy tumors. So that means, we are making a great progress from the actual imaging to intraoperative mapping to targeted therapy and targeted delivery and targeted detection from the imaging all the way to nano.
I mean, it seems like the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know is basically what's going on. You're learning more, but you're realizing, wow, every time you learn something that there's so much more that you don't know. And, people say that we only use 20% of our brain, that there's so much of the brain that we don't either know how to access or can access. Do you believe that? And if so, how do we access those parts of the brain?
I'm not sure. Depends on individuals, right? So some individuals are trying to, be creative at the same time, athletic at the same time, be prolific writers and so on. So you have it all. All of us have it. So it depends on you want to use it or not. So, and that is not across the board. Of course, professor like you are using it to the fullest extent. But the basics are there, and the ability to reconnect part of the brain and in a sense exercise your brain with your activities is in your hands. So, and that's obviously related to neuroplasticity. We all are aware of. Brain is like a muscle. You have to work it out. If you don't work it out, you're going to lose it. And with trillions of connections, you can use some of those connections, make your day better.
But I want to talk about neuroplasticity. I'm glad you brought that up. How does neuroplasticity affect brain mapping? Meaning that everyone's connections are different. Everyone's experiences are different. Everyone's memories are different. How does that affect general brain mapping?
That's an excellent question, Professor, because most of us, let's say for epilepsy surgery, you do a preoperative surgical planning, right? Even for tumor resection, right? So, but that's probably done a few weeks ago or a few days ago, and then we don't calculate the brain plasticity within this whole, formation of the brain map. And we don't have you and I even do not have a single brain map. Our brain map actually changes, as our activities changes, our brain map is changes. So understanding of that will help us to better plan for study of the brain, obviously. But we need to be sensitive toward neuroplasticity. And if we are doing procedures, our protocol should be closer to the time of surgery, not far away from it. So, because, of course, many things can change. Now, some would agree that, well, it's not going to change much, but that's just speculative. Depending on where your surgery is it in the motor area? Is it in sensory area? And is this patient experiencing different type of activities and so on? And all of a sudden, they take out a part, as you know, a millimeter here and there makes a difference in the brain, and the patient will show up with a different outcome.
Now, what would you say is the biggest discovery in brain mapping in the last few years that's really changed the game?
I would say, well, I can't say biggest because there are several big ones. I would say the wave of supercomputing application in brain mapping, the work that's being done mostly by European Human Brain Project, and they are using supercomputers to look at the slices of brain tissues, very thin slices in every individual, in thousands of them, and look at the connectomics and so on. So introduction of AI machine learning, I would say, is somewhat new, and but I'll come back to that. The second one is nano diagnostics and therapeutics, nano neurosurgery, I would say, because the field is exploding. When we started the first textbook, the first edition, there were 3,000 articles out there. We referenced about 5,000, 3,000. We referenced it. Now it's in tens of thousands of articles. So we're kind of scrambling to put the second edition together. So the field of nanomedicine is targeted therapy, or personalized medicine, you want to call it, or precision personalized nanomedicine becomes a really way of the future. To just give you one example, the COVID-19 vaccine was a nanomedicine, right? So it's very, very targeted. It's perfectly delivered, and is extremely, effective. So those two areas, plus, I would say, non-invasive or less invasive optical spectroscopy. The field of optics has exploded, and using optics for intraoperative mapping is going to be rampant. As you know, many of the microscopes now have different, blue light, yellow light, and different optics. But we have used some of the technologies that's been used in space exploration for our intraoperative mapping. So
now you've done such pioneering work. I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, those three areas at least are kind of on the forefront. So in terms of the that not only diagnostics but also therapeutics, So for AI machine learning, now the problem is not how much data we can get from the brain. The problem is, my gosh, how can I save this data, and then how can I share it with others? And that is something that the society is really focusing on, because you used to have like a 1 or 2 scans for a patient, you put them up and you look at them. Now you have like a multi-modality imaging. You have to go on the PAC system, look at them all. Now you have to have a software to combine all those. Now you have the biopsy, and now genetic data, and all of this is really changing the way the field of neurosurgery is going to be in next, I would say, 5 years. In 5 years, probably we're not going to be doing too much of invasive neurosurgery.
Yeah, that's what everyone is saying. Especially the way you're talking about nanotechnology, things are becoming smaller, less invasive, to the point where surgery is not going to be surgery as we know it. And while surgeons like to operate, it is an exciting time to see how the technology is advancing. I want to talk a little bit about your research, because you've been such a pioneer in this field. Tell us a little bit about the exciting things you're working on when it comes to brain mapping.
Sure. Of course, nanoparticles are one. So in the field of vascular, neurosurgery and interventional neuroradiology, you are familiar with coiling, right? So, but the coiling is a great market and fantastic. What the coiling folks don't know, that there are new nanomaterial that could be better than coiling. So you basically inject it to the vessel, and just really seals off and have the problem with the current technology. So I think adaptation of new technologies by the users and providers is the key, something that we are pushing through the Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutics. I would say stem cell therapeutics, that's another one. our past president, Dr. Bob Heredia, which I will introduce you to him to be interviewed here. He's a pioneer neurosurgeon. His company is the first stem cell company going public, Cellularity. So this field of immunotherapy and cell therapy becomes much, much more effective in treating cancers. So my own research is, as I mentioned, is in area of optical spectroscopy and nanotechnology. And now I'm getting into much more like AI machine learning, but in terms of not much on the augmented reality and mixed reality side. That's kind of somewhat old now. It actually in the area of predictive modeling. So maybe at another event, I can show you some of the videos we have, some of the talks, but, imagine you have 10,000 patients who are brain cancer patients. And if you're studying individual population of patients, from the genetics to imaging to biopsy and so on, you will see that, there are varieties even within the GBM. There are a variety of behavior of these tumors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we treat all GBM the same. Okay, so we need to have a personalized precision medicine. So where does this combination of cell therapy with imaging and the nanotechnology and AI machine learning come together, which we call it the nanobioelectronics? So the nano side is nanomedicine. The bio side is the cellular. Electronic side is imaging and anything else. So I think integration of all these different fields will become the base for precision nanomedicine. And to give you an example, I actually encourage your team or your group to work with your stem cell group to take the biopsy of GBM and culture it and test the medication that you're giving to the patient on the petri dish and look at the behavior and dosage and then take it to the patient. And, so you can actually, so that is really when you personalize treatment by taking even the skin cells and as there are techniques you can make them embryonic stem cells. So I think that's the direction that you will see my research and some other groups' research going to go. How do we integrate the cutting edge of AI machine learning, predictive modeling, with nanotechnology, with advanced imaging, to have a focal point that we understand the disease better, and we come up with the personalized precision medicine. The other point I wanted to make here is that we are interested in looking at a population of patients with neurological disorders, be it Alzheimer, brain cancer, Parkinson, autism. For that, you need supercomputing. For that, you need a massive data to look at variations of these diseases, okay, across population of people with different genomic background, and then come up with specific type of treatment for each.
It's just, I think you said it best when you're talking about targeted therapy and patient-specific treatments. That is how cancer should be treated. And you're right. All GBMs are treated the same, yet every single GBM is different. And the culturing and the targeted therapy is certainly the holy grail. And that's something that I think many cancer centers are working towards. We are certainly looking towards doing that. There's obviously a lot of barriers, as you know, but it is something that we are striving to do. I want to talk a little bit about awake craniotomy surgery, which we do a lot of here. One of the rare situations where the brain is exposed, a patient is awake, you can interact with them, talking, moving. What can we learn in terms of brain mapping during these procedures, other than just simply removing the tumor? I feel like it's such a unique opportunity when you have this organ exposed and you can map it out in real time with a person interacting. You know, in your ideal world, what will we be learning from these awake craniotomies?
I think awake craniotomy, the way it's done, is kind of old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're looking at the protocols for awake craniotomy, it's just going way back, several decades. So I think the way it should be done is it has to be done with optical spectroscopy, because everything in the universe has an optical signature. You know, you take a look at anything, so you can actually detect cancer using optical spectroscopy, but you can detect ammunitions, you can detect, so that's really in the military world and the space NASA world. Optical spectroscopy use is rampant. That's how we detect what is in a rock on a Mars, but just looking at it. So awake craniotomy, it does not have that element in it. It has to be. So I think that's where the technology is out there, but has not been translated to practice. And that's another area that we are interested because you and I can develop great technologies and innovation in our lab, but if the policies are not in place to translate and incentivize that transfer of knowledge from an innovative lab to actual practice, then you and I will not change our practice as physicians. You and I will not will continue the same lobotomy of the past, right? Remember? Mm-hmm. So the person who did the lobotomy got the Nobel Prize, but now we know it was a horrible mistake. So that's where I think policy come to place. That's why we work with President Obama to start a brain initiative, and with President Biden we are on cancer moonshot and on opioid addiction and so on, and the veterans issues through the society. That's why I think I want one of the lessons or maybe message taken from this discussion to be an activist. Be an activist in a science and political sense, because you can talk to your congressman, you can talk to your senator, local assemblyman, local senators, bring them to your lab, show them the stem cells, show them the research you're doing. Science is bipartisan, nonpartisan. When I talk to congressional leaders in Republican side, Democrat side, they're all having families with brain cancer, Alzheimer, autism, you name it, so, brain aneurysm, you name it. So educating policymakers will help us as scientists to bridge that gap of innovation to market. And that's one of the other work that I'm doing, so really educating policymakers from the president, even President Trump, to President Biden, President Obama, because if we don't educate them about science and technology that's coming up, if they don't hear about nanoneurosurgery, neurophotonics, and AI machine learning, augmented reality in neurosurgery, they cannot pass the laws that help us to take that to market. So there is a great need that all of us who are on this call and this podcast, at least make an attempt to invite your congressman, senator, come to your lab, talk to them, educate them about the state of science and technology.
I think you said it best in the sense that for 99% of society, the brain is a black box. They know nothing about it. It's something they don't they haven't really thought about very much. And we as neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, neurologists, psychiatrists, we have that privilege of being able to understand the brain, and we should definitely make an effort to educate people that can have an impact in the future. I think that that's very, very well said. One last question, because I know we're running out of time here. I just want to get your crystal ball view in the next kind of 5, 10, 20 years. Give us what you think are going to be some major breakthroughs in the near future when it comes to brain mapping.
So on the policy side, we just published, 2 papers that are very important. I point out. One was brain screening. So we screen for prostate, liver, lung, and breast, but why don't we screen for the brain as part of healthcare? So if we can screen the brain ahead of time, we can identify mental health issues ahead of time. If we allow brain screening, let's say MRI each 5 years in patients, or CT scanning 5 years, you capture the brain aneurysm earlier, the rate of death goes down. So it's preventive measure. I think that will change with hopefully with Biden administration. We encourage everybody to put their weight behind this. So brain screening and in a sense of a health checkup, I think that's on the policy side that can actually become preventive and much more diagnostics. In terms of the treatment and diagnostic, as I said, nanoneurosurgery and cellular therapeutics. So immunotherapy, nano, these are kind of coming up already there, and you're going to see a less and less invasive therapy, more and more use of nanoparticles. To give you a couple of examples, I know we are going out of time. We were working on a nano drug that you could actually inject at a time of traumatic brain injury to the patient. So it's reduce the inflammation, increase oxygenation in the brain, expand the golden hours for treatment of the patients. So that could be used for battlefield, that could be used for sports, that could be used for car accidents. So you will see the variety of different nano drugs coming up, and cellular therapy, as I mentioned, and also you will see of course, the radiology, as we know, it's going to be revolutionized by AI, but also intraoperative mapping and so on, with AI, machine learning, and predictive modeling become a big part of our cancer therapy. Because imagine you get a data from the patient from the day one in the ER all the way to their last treatment, and then you match that with thousands of patients in the same category of GBM, then you can predict the pattern of behavior and movement of these tumors based on their genomic path. Therefore, you could predict this tumor that is in the frontal lobe going to be spread to parietal lobe in 6 months, and therefore you have adjunctive therapy with nano and so on. Basically, that will completely change the paradigm of neurosurgery.
It's such an exciting time. I want to say thank you for this interview. Like we discussed earlier, the brain really is the final frontier in medicine. And the more we learn, the more amazing scientists like you find out stuff, the more we realize we got a long ways to go. And I think that hearing you talk about the future and how these developments are going to change the way we practice medicine in general, not just surgery, but the way we treat all these brain diseases, very exciting. All the collaborations that you have, all the technology that you're using. Kudos to you and your team. Thanks to educating, legislation across the world when it comes to brain initiatives, a real role model. So again, thank you so much for your time. Have a great weekend, and we'll be talking soon, my friend.
Thank you, Professor. And thank you for your leadership, and thank the audience for their patience. And I hope we delivered new information that is going to help their practice.
Absolutely, buddy. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon.